Hello viewers, my name is Damilari. In this lesson, we'll be looking at the topic, the ear. The ear. What is the ear? The ear is the organ of hearing. The ear is the organ of hearing. Not only to hear, but also for balancing. For balancing. So let's proceed to look at what the ear entails and what are the parts of the ear. The mammals have two ears on each side of the head. The greater part of it is enclosed in the skull, meaning outwardly you may only be seeing the pinna. This is just what we see. That's the outer part of the ear, but we have majority inside. So majority is in the skull, and the reason is for protection, so that those parts of the ear can be protected. So once again, it is for hearing and for balancing. So looking at the structure of the ear, we have the outer, the middle, and the inner. So which part is called outer? That's the pinna, which you are seeing here already. This is flexible. You can twist the pinna. The reason is because that it is soft, made of soft cartilage, just like that of shark. So soft cartilage is covered with skin. So the pinna, its function is to collect sound, just like when you are playing table tennis, you use the bat to bounce the egg, the ball. So the same way, this can also bounce the sound, it can bounce the sound, so it collects sound. Once it takes that, it will detect their direction and direct them into the canal. So what is the name of that canal? That's external auditory canal, or meatus. So it means once this pinna receives the sound, it will bounce it or send it to the external auditory canal, which is this. Then from there, it will now bounce to the tympanic membrane. That's the eardrum. So this is the eardrum here. So it will bounce to the tympanic membrane. This is and let's look at that. We have actually talked about pinna, which is the external, that is directing the sound into the external auditory. What of the external auditory itself? This consists of fine air. Like when you check some people's air, you will see air from within. So that's what we see in the external auditory meatus. And there's also gland there, which produce wax. So there's a gland inside this external auditory meatus that is producing wax. You see that we always pack the wax in our ear. So that wax is actually in the external auditory meatus because of the glands that is producing it. So therefore it prevents germs. So it's because of germs, that's why it's secreting those wax. So it prevents germs, and then when insect is coming, it will kill them, and dust, so that they will not enter and affect the ear. It also allows the passage of sound waves. So it will allow waves to pass coming from pinna to the ear drum. Then we also have the tympanic membrane, which is also known as the ear drum. This ear drum is very thin. It's a thin membrane. Its work is to vibrate. Once sound is coming from the external, so it will vibrate to the ear drum. So when sound waves get to it, it will just vibrate it. And it's the separation between external and then the middle ear. So it means when you get to the eardrum, you are already moving to the middle. You have left the external. So that is what the eardrum does. Therefore, it transmits sound waves from the outer to the middle. So it transmits sound wave from outer to the middle. Now let's look at the middle here. This is a small air-filled chamber. It is small. It is air-filled. It is also inside the skull, meaning that it's not outer like the pinna. So it's inside the skull, and it's made up of three tiny soft bones. Three tiny soft bones. So they call them ossicles. There are three ear ossicles, and apart from those three ossicles, we also have eustachian tube that's found in the middle here. Let's look at the ear ossicles. You can use MIS to remember them. M for malleus, I for incus, S for stapes. That's MIS, or SIM from the back. You see S for stape, I for incus, M for malleus. So you can use that to remember the different ossicles in the middle here. Now, another name for this MIS is, you can say HAS. H means hammer, meaning that malleus is same thing as hammer, incus is same thing as anvil, stapes is same thing as stirrup. So you can take HAS as. Then looking at these ossicles, they always form a bridge linking the outer and the inner here. It's like a bridge when you want to cross from the outer to the inner, so it's like a bridge. So through a membrane covered opening called round window. So there's always a round window when you are crossing from the outer to the middle, so it's like a bridge. So these ossicles, so the ossicles can also do what we call, it can transmit vibrations. Ossicles, they can transmit immediately. Vibrations comes from the outer getting to the eardrum, so they will just transmit that vibrations across the tympanic membrane. That means the one coming from the eardrum, they will transmit it to that oval window, and the pressure in the window will be magnified, to be increased. So that's how the ear ossicle works. Then one of them always amplify, that's the middle one, the incus. So it means if the hammer is vibrating from the eardrum, the incus will amplify, then the stape will vibrate it to the other part. Now, Eustachian tube. What is the function of Eustachian tube? This is a narrow tube. It's narrow, it goes down in the middle here. It's connecting to the pharynx. Remember, it's for the throat. So this usually opens when yawning. So once you yawn, you will see the Eustachian tube will open. So it will open. So it allows air to, and that's why air will move or enter. It allows air to enter or leave the middle here. So if you want air to come or to leave the middle here, so this Eustachian tube is the passage. So, and it can equalize air pressure on both sides of the eardrum. So it will equalize the air pressure. Now let's move to the inner ear. For the inner ear, this is made up of a bony complex passage. Bony complex passageway. They call it bony labyrinth. Bony labyrinth. That's the inner ear. That's bony complex passage called bony labyrinth. It is filled with fluid. You see fluid inside this inner ear. So that fluid, we call it perilymph. Perilymph is the fluid in the inner ear inside the bony labyrinth, are what we call membranous sacs. That's inside the bony labyrinth. We have membranous sacs and we have tubes that are called membranous labyrinths. Membranous labyrinth. So they are filled with the fluid. So they are filled with the fluid. We also have what we call endolymph. So all these are fluid in the inner ear: perilymph, endolymph. So that's for the inner ear. Now in the inner ear, that's where we get what we call the cochlea, the one that looks like snail shell. The cochlea, and we have the semicircular canals, those three parts that are at the top. So the cochlea, like I say, is snail shell like structure of hearing. So his one is concerned with hearing. So it contains sensory air cells. So those the air that are there, the sensory air cells, so they are sensory, they are mechanoreceptors. So which they are mechanoreceptors which synapse with sensory neurons. They always meet up with the sensory neurons. So those sensory air cells, and they form the cochlear nerves. Cochlear nerves. So that's for the cochlea. Now semicircular canals. These three canals, they are always right angle to one another. So they are right angle to one another, and they have swollen ends. Swollen ends. So that swollen end is called ampulla. So ampulla is the swollen ends of this semicircular canal, and it contains sensory air cells and otoliths. So it has sensory air cells and otoliths. From the old liths is solid like stone. The otol is here, so ear stones. So ear stones are there. So then these structures are concerned with balance. So semicircular canal, their work is to balance. Even though we have said they have right angle to each other, they have swollen ends, they have focal ampulla, they also contain sensory air cells and otoliths, all those stony part of the ear. So they are there. So and it's for balancing or maintaining posture. If you want to maintain posture, that's semicircular canal. Then mechanism of hearing. How do we hear and also how do we balance, because it's for hearing and balancing. For the mechanism of hearing, the pinna will first detect, it will collect the sound waves in the air and concentrate them. So after collecting sound wave, so in the air, it will now concentrate them and pass them on through external auditory meatus. So the wave causes the tympanic membrane to vibrate. So it will first vibrate and the vibrations are passed on to the ear ossicles. So the vibration from that tympanic, it will just vibrate to the ear ossicles. That's the three ossicles which amplify them. So then the oval windows, it will magnify the vibration. So that means oval window is also doing the work of vibration. It will magnify the and pass it them into the inner ear. So it will pass them to the inner ear. So that's the cochlea, where the perilymph and the endolymph will vibrate. So the vibrations of the endolymph stimulates. It will stimulate. So meaning that major thing is just vibration. So the vibration of the endolymph will stimulate the organ of Corti in the cochlea to convert the sound vibration to electrical impulse. So the impulses then stimulates the auditory nerves or the acoustic branch to the brain for interpretation. So that is how the hearing takes place. Then balancing. How does balancing take place? That's head movement in any direction will cause the fluid in the semicircular canals and the otoliths. So when you move your head in any direction, so the fluid that we have in that semicircular canals, so and the otoliths we also have in the ampullae, so they will move. So impulses are set up and transmitted through the vestibular branch of the auditory nerves to the brain for interpretation. The brain relays impulses to the body muscles for balancing the position of the body. So the second to the last, what are the diseases of the ear? What can happen to the ear? The major disease is deafness. So that's either temporary or permanent. So that is the major disease of the ear, that's deafness. So the deafness can be caused by damage to the tympanic membrane. Once the eardrum is damaged, then there will be deafness, or Eustachian tube if it is damaged, or sensory cells. So sensory cells in the cochlea. So there are some sensory cells in the cochlea, so they must not be damaged. So take note of the eardrum, Eustachian tube, and the cochlea. Also, wax blocking the ear canal, infection of the ear, or sudden very loud or constant noise causes deafness. So these are the diseases. Then finally, how do we care for our ear? So regular use of cotton wool. Cotton wool can help to clean your hair. Don't use sharp objects in dimming the ear. So don't use sharp objects. Avoid loud noise. So don't always loud noise. So that's by you should avoid loud noise. So you should avoid loud noise. Then avoid being blown on the ear side that can damage the eardrum. So avoid loud noise. Some people, when they make noise around them, so it can be too much for the ear. And don't allow someone to just come and blow your ear side that can damage your eardrum. Then always consult medical doctors in case of any ear problem. So that is for the ear. Then briefly, let me say some things about the nose, which is the organ of smell. Looking at the nose, um, it is the human olfactory organ, that means for smelling. There is an epithelial lining inside that nasal cavity, that means the nose is rich in sensory nerve ending. They always detect anything smell. Compared to lower class animals like dog, man has a poor sense of smell. Dog can easily perceive smell, but man, they, they have poor sense of smell. That's why when they go to a place, maybe there was a smell in the first place, after a while the smell will go down, even though that thing is still there. So talking about poor sense of smell, we detect smell quickly but for a short time. So talking about poor sense of smell in human. How do we smell? Mechanism of smelling. Nose functions well when wet. It means our nose must first be wet before we can smell anything. There is a smell receptors which are stimulated by chemicals. It means when chemicals come from food, from anything that is smelling, so once it comes to the nose, so there are some receptors that will receive that chemicals. So the particles of those chemicals that are coming from that particular thing that is smelling, so they are volatile. So they are volatile, they can easily dry off. So receptors in the volatile chemical substance in the air to come and dissolve in the mucous layer over the cell receptors in the nostril. So stimulation of the receptors, that means once these receptors in the nose is stimulated, it will give rise to nerve impulse, which immediately will travel through the olfactory nerve. Is going to the olfactory lobe of the brain. So the brain will now interpret the kind of smell. So that is for the nose. Now, what are the other things we need to know about the nose before we look at the tongue? Though those things are not mentioned here, but take note that there are certain um, things that always make smelling to be affected. So certain things, maybe there is a kind of obstruction in the nose, or maybe especially when one is having phlegm. When there is phlegm, that's the catarrh blocking the nose, so it can affect you knowing the exact smell of something. Then finally, we'll be looking at the tongue, which is also another sense organ. So what can we say about the tongue? The first thing is that tongue is the organ of taste. You want to taste anything, it is the tongue, because of the sensory cells that are there in the tongue. So, and those sensory cells, we call them taste buds. Taste buds, they are always located on the tiny swellings on the exposed surface of the tongue, and they are connected by 4 sensory nerves to the brain. So the brain will now interpret what is tasted. So it's always sensitive to those 4 primary tastes. We have the sweet taste. You can detect this by chemoreceptors, always at the tip of the tongue. Like when you want to taste your sugar, you use your tip of your tongue. Then we also have what we call salty taste. This is detected by chemoreceptors also, and this one is always found by the side, which is the frontal side of the tongue. We also have sour taste. So the sour taste, this one is detected by chemoreceptors also, but is at the side of the tongue towards the back. Then the bitter taste, this one is always detected also by chemoreceptors, but at the back of the tongue. So what are the mechanisms? How do we taste things? First thing is that chemicals from any substance you want to taste that you put in your mouth will first dissolve in your saliva on the tongue. So it will stimulate the sensory nerve endings in your taste bud, which will then be passed in form of impulse to the brain, so that it can be interpreted as sweet, bitter, sour, or salty. Both smell and taste, they are closely related. That's in terms of sensation, they are closely related. So hence we smell what we taste. So It is what we taste that we smell. So they have something very close. Then when we eat and drink, the taste receptors are stimulated, either you eat or you drink. So at the same time, flavor producing chemical from the food always dissolve in the moist air in the mouth and flow into the nasal cavity to stimulate the smell receptors. So the smell sensation is more severe than taste sensation. So meaning that as you are smelling, so there will be a need for taste. So because they work together. So you can see the parts. This is the sweetness that's at the tip, and this is the bitterness at the back of the tongue. Then we also have the salty, that's the one that is by the side but towards the front. Then the sour taste, so that's also by the side but towards the back. So that is how the tongue functions. Then there's something about the tongue. Sometimes we may not be able to detect the taste of something. Probably one, because of it, the combination of food. Maybe you have mixed many foods together in your mouth, so you may not be able to detect taste. Then secondly, maybe the person is indisposed. Someone that is sick may also not be able to detect taste of substance, or when the food is hot, so we may not be able to detect the specific taste. So thanks for listening.